I consider myself a shy extrovert with introvert tendencies. And the thing that I discovered is that because there's a shyness, the best way to deal with shyness is to get the focus off you as fast as possible. And what better way of doing that than asking someone else a question?
Hello, and welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. In the show, my guests and I explore how we can use creativity to do our best work and live our best lives. I talk with authors, musicians, actors, scientists, and others who are all pushing the envelope to live fully, creatively, and authentically. Listen in to get the scoop on how you can do it too. Hello, and welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am super thrilled you're here. I'm also so excited about my guest this week. John DeDakis is a former CNN senior copy editor on the award-winning The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, so you know he's got cred. And he's also a former White House correspondent, which plays really well into what we're going to be talking about today. And he left reporting the news to write about. And it's amazing to me that his Lark Chadwick series is as gripping and insightful and full of suspense as it is, because I'm jaded. I love mysteries. I love spy stories. And he got me. I mean, I've read all the greats and he got me. And it's terrific book. So Fake, the latest in the series. In this book, John tackles fake news and how it can ruin lives and perhaps even topple governments. John and I met at a meeting of the Maryland Writers Association. John was teaching a workshop, and I had the pleasure of learning from him. If you ever get a chance to check out one of his workshops, do it. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. It's incredible. And really, because some of what he taught me that day changed my writing style and really, in some ways, my life. So I'm thrilled to welcome John DeDakis. Welcome.
Wow, thank you very much.
This is so great. So I think it's so funny that we met at a writing workshop, because I actually had never heard of you before then. And you came in.
This is true of most people.
But no, you see, you came in and you had this wonderful exercise. It was a writing exercise. And I did it and I went, wait a minute, I know. Because you gave us prompts, and I didn't realize that what I needed in order to really prompt my writing was prompts. So I'm you cannot know how grateful I am for that little hook that you gave me that has changed how I write and how I've written most of the books I've written now. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the feedback. That means a lot to me. Thanks.
Sure. So let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning.
A long way.
But not in a galaxy far, far away. So so you started your career in journalism at University of Wisconsin at the radio station. What drew you to journalism? What inspired you to report the news?
Well, that does go a long way back. I mean, I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, along the Mississippi River. And for the longest time, I really wanted to go into politics. But I'd also been interested in broadcasting as sort of a hobby. When I was about, 12, I think, I stumbled across the local radio station, the rock and roll radio station in La Crosse, WLCX. It's defunct now, and met the disc jockey who was the rock and roll DJ, Pete Lakin. And he invited me into the studio, and I got my first look behind the scenes at a radio station. And it was this dumpy shack in the middle of a swamp along the La Crosse River. And it was tremendously exciting, for a lack of a better word. And so broadcasting was always sort of playing subconsciously there. And I was a disc jockey at school for the mixers and stuff like that. But, politics was really what I was interested in. And for the longest time, the plan was to get into politics, but go into law with my dad. My dad was a lawyer, and then I was going to use law as a stepping stone into politics. And when I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison in 1968, that was when the Vietnam War was a big deal. It was in all the papers. and there was a draft. And if you had a number below 150, chances are you were going to get drafted. So, the campus was seething with anti-war activity. And the thing that really bothered me is when I would go to class, I would be bombarded from both the left and the right to take a position. And I just felt I was being spun. I just felt that whoever was trying to pitch me to go one way or the other was leaving out stuff that would undermine their position. So I was very confused because I came from a Nixon Republican household, and Madison, Wisconsin was everything to the left of that. And so uh, I volunteered at a campus radio station to just to get a better feel for journalism, and got tear gassed covering an anti-war riot
Wow.
after Kent State. And I think that sort of began to radicalize me. And I had a number of 14 in the first draft lottery. So I mean, I was going to get drafted,
Hmm.
and I enlisted to avoid the draft only because my dad, who was on the draft board, basically said, "I'm not going to get you out of this, but talk to a recruiter and find out what your options are." And I discovered that they had military journalism. So I enlisted so I'd have more control over what I'd do when I was in the military. Of course, I promptly got orders to Vietnam, which was a major crisis. But just as in real life, when there's a crisis, in journalism we call it a story, in real life we call it a crisis, in fiction it's a plot twist. And so the plot twist in my life was, instead of going to Vietnam, my orders were changed 2 weeks before I was to ship out. They were changed to Germany, and I spent the next 2.5 years at the headquarters of the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt, Germany, doing interviews on a special events radio unit. And one of the first interviews I did was with this guy named Alfred Hitchcock. You may have heard
just
of him.
just
Just
some
happened,
guy.
just some guy. But this was a mentoring moment because my boss, Herb Glover, had worked at CBS with Walter Cronkite, and Herb could have done the interview in his sleep. And instead, he trusted this 22-year-old kid not to screw it up. And that's how I got into journalism, because I discovered what I was good at, what I loved. So when I got out of the Army, I went back to UW-Madison. And instead of nearly flunking out, I got a degree in journalism, 3.5 average, not brilliant, but I grew up. And that really then was the career trajectory I stayed on for until I left CNN after 25 years in 2013, I think it was. I've been retired for a while.
Wow. That right there, I hope that you're going to write your memoirs someday because
I am writing them
wow.
now. I'm
Oh,
writing them now, actually.
well, good. Sign me up. That was
Thank you.
what a story. I'm sitting here going, I had all these questions to ask, but now I'm all
But I talked
kerfuffled.
too long, and now it's
No,
all the time we have, folks.
no. I'm just all kerfuffled because there are so many. So, okay, I'm going to start with y- you spent time in Frankfurt. You got to interview an amazing filmmaker, Alfred Hitchcock.
Mhm.
Something about that made you excited. What about talking to people? What about interviewing them and finding out who they are sparked your creative sizzle, your curiosity?
And well, that's a really insightful question. And I don't think I've put it into words quite like this before, but something that you said sort of crystallized just now, because I consider myself a shy extrovert with introvert tendencies. And the thing that I discovered is that because there's a shyness, the best way to deal with shyness is to get this focus off you as fast as possible. And what better way of doing that than asking someone else a question? And so that then became sort of an instinctive default mechanism. And it just so happened that I worked in a profession where I could do just that. That's not to say that it wasn't scary. I mean, I was petrified, interviewing this guy, and you never want to sound stupid, but at the same time, sometimes those are the best interviews when you're asking questions you don't know the answer to because you're learning. And so that was sort of the fringe benefit of, being shy, being introverted to a certain extent, because then when you're not talking, you're listening and you're learning when you're listening.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating that you said that, because that idea of listening is so it's paramount as far as I'm concerned to being a good interviewer, in order to be able
Right.
to find those nuances, to find those little bits and pieces that are going to make something really blossom. And I love that you've actually crystallized that for yourself, but also for me, because I feel the same way. I'm naturally a curious person, and
Mhm.
I love finding things out. So let me ask you that.
Right.
What right now, before we go back to the past, what are you curious about right now? What has you excited?
Ooh, I don't know if I can answer that question. You're putting me on the spot, ma'am.
Yes, I am.
Uh, I mean, you already, to a certain extent, before we went on, you were on the receiving end of my curiosity because I was asking you questions about podcasting, because that's something I'm entertaining and starting to get into. So I suppose that's something that's on my mind now, and I bombarded you with a few questions about what you do and why you do it. So you're probably going to be on one of my shows.
Oh, fabulous. Again, sign me up.
Okay.
And it's funny because this is such a fascinating way to communicate. It reminds me of some of the radio that went on in the 30s and 40s, where this is the
Hmm.
kind of thing that happened. You did interviews like this because
Hmm.
that's what the technology would allow. But now
Hmm.
I think we're getting back to this one-on-one conversation that allows us to
Hmm.
really explore some deep topics. And when you were doing that kind of work, that kind of interviewing work, when you were at CNN, when you were a White House correspondent, talk to me about what was it like when you started, and what has changed between then and now? Like how we process news, how we report it. What is your thought on that?
Well, journalism has definitely evolved, and most of its evolution has happened because of technology and
Hmm.
technological advances. So when I first got into the business, there were no cell phones, there was no internet. It was basically you and a microphone,
Hmm.
maybe a tape recorder, probably definitely a notebook. And then when I got into television, it was film. And that meant that if you were out on a story, you had to get your film back to the station, by 3 in the afternoon so that they could process it. And so, now we are at a point where everyone who has a cell phone can go live. And it's just phenomenal, the changes that have happened. And because of that, things have gotten more chaotic. Um, so I guess we've come a long way, and even when I first started out, they were people were talking about how advanced things were from, back in the days, even before broadcasting. I can remember, I think Cronkite, when he went to radio, he'd been a wire service correspondent, and a
Hmm.
lot of people felt that he'd sold out, by going to this new upstart superficial medium called radio.
Hmm. That's so funny. And it is interesting that when you embrace technology, there are some people who are going to be all for it, and there are some people who are going to poo-poo it. I
Mhm.
find that so fascinating. And yet at the same time, look at even the most recent news stories, that some of which have been broken because somebody had a cell phone, like Ahmaud Arbery,
Yes.
his murder being caught on video. We would not know anything about it if that had not happened. If somebody had not had a cell phone and caught that, and
Right.
it became
And
worldwide news.
the thing is, with technology itself is morally neutral. It's
Mhm.
what you do with it. And that's where we run into problems. I don't have any kind of a problem with the internet, uh, but I do have a problem with people who will forward information that is unvetted or is made up or false or whatever, incomplete. That's where the problem is. It's not the technology. It's who. It's a matter of in whose hands it is
And how they're using it, for sure.
and how they're using it
For
exactly.
sure. So what is the way to vet? How would somebody who's got a story, how would they vet it? Would they call a reporter? Would they, what's the appropriate process, do you think?
Well, I think what you're asking is how does someone get something on the air? Is that what you're asking,
Well,
or?
actually not. I mean, like you said, somebody can get something on the air right now by having a cell phone and uploading it to YouTube, right? So,
Mhm, yeah.
so if we're talking about, vetting a piece of news, vetting a story, figuring out what the facts actually are,
Mhm.
and wanting to put it up after having done so, how would you do that if you saw something or you videotaped something or you wanted to write about something? What is the proper path to make sure that what you put out is true as opposed to fake?
That is the $64,000 question, isn't it?
It is.
Um, Look, the I do a lot of talks, and some of the things I talk about is journalism and the whole fake news phenomenon.
Mhm.
And one of the things and some of the time, just about even before Trump was elected, I was getting questions about, media bias. In fact,
Mhm.
let's go back to Watergate because my parents were Nixon Republicans.
Mhm.
And when I decided to go into journalism, as far as they were concerned, I just joined the dark side
Wow.
because they felt that Nixon was run out of the White House by journalists,
Hmm.
which he was, but they were just reporting on what he did.
Right.
And had there not been those White House tapes, um, he probably would have, finished his second term without a problem because they didn't have enough evidence. It was all circumstantial.
Right.
But when you have him actually on tape talking about the cover up, and he's lied about it, then you've got some elements for impeachment. So when I went into journalism, my mom said to me, she said, if I hear in your reporting bias, even if it's something I agree with, you've failed. Just give me the facts and let me make up my own mind. And so that's really the axiom that I tried to follow in my journalism career.
Mhm.
So now, fast forward. Now we're in a situation where the president of the United States is accusing journalists of being the enemy of the American people,
Right.
when the Constitution sets up freedom of the press, which is supposed to hold government accountable and also make it possible for people's opinions to be expressed.
Mhm.
So when you have, the highest elected official in the country undermining the institution of journalism, not to mention the intelligence community and the police, whatever he doesn't like, he does his best to undermine.
Right.
And there are plenty of people now who don't trust Fauci. They don't trust journalism. They only trust, the guy with the loudest voice. And so we're now in a position where it's much more difficult to discern what's
Mhm.
fake and what's real, which is something I try to address in my novel. But it really, I think, Isolde, comes back to trustworthy um, organs of journalism. Um, and there are still trustworthy news organizations,
Mhm.
at least trustworthy to me, and that's the problem. Not everybody agrees with me or the sources I consider to be reliable.
Right.
But the point, I'll make this one point and then I'll shut up. Um, my point when I talk to organizations and groups is, the point I make is, if you're really concerned about fake news, then you really need to look at yourself and your own social media hygiene. Uh, because when you hit post or send, you are a publisher. You have just published something. But There's no editor sitting there saying, where'd you get this? How do you know it's true? Which is what happens at the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Associated Press. You wouldn't believe how difficult it is to get a story in print because there's editorial oversight that challenges a reporter to make sure that they are being fair and accurate. And, some Yahoo sitting at home hitting send about Hillary's emails or, whatever, there's nobody saying, where'd you get that? I was speaking somewhere in Southern Virginia, and someone was going off on me about fake news. And I remember asking her, "Where do you get your news?" She said, "I get it from Breitbart." And my
Oh
jaw
boy.
and my jaw dropped. And she said, "Well, I've got to have my opinion reinforced." And I said, "Actually, no. You need to have your opinion informed, and then you can, go wherever you want. But, where do you get just the facts, ma'am, reliable information upon which you can then form an opinion?" I feel strongly about this. Sorry to filibuster.
No, no, no. Do not ever apologize. I am right. I'm walking that path with you. And I'm so glad that you answered as you did, because I feel like this is such an important topic, and it's so easy to get polarized on one side or another. And
Mhm.
having the cool, calm, collected voice of John DeDakis going, actually, you know,
My heart rate is about, I don't know, 120 right now, Isolde.
yeah, but that's not what you sounded like. No, here's
Oh,
the thing. Here's the important part to me of what you said. You said you didn't say that it has to be what you believe. You said
mhm,
get the facts. You said
mhm,
make your opinion an informed opinion, an educated opinion. That
mhm,
is crucial, I think. And I asked you
mhm.
the question to begin with because it is something that I think is so important, and I think you obviously have a lot of knowledge about how to answer it, and you answered it exactly as I would have liked. You said find the facts.
Yeah,
That's how you
thank
do
you.
it. You have to find the facts. And
Mhm,
I'm so grateful that you said that, because I think one of the things that's happening to journalists now is that people are on the attack on one side or the other,
mhm.
and it doesn't really matter at this point what the journalist says. Somebody's going to say they're wrong regardless of whether or not they have the facts to back up what they're saying.
Right. Mhm.
So I'm very grateful that you answered as you did, because it's exactly I agree with it anyway, and I think probably other people will as well. But
But not everyone.
but no, and you know what? But you know what? People can change.
Sure.
People can change. And I was a hardcore fiscally conservative Republican when I was growing up,
Mhm,
and boy, am I not one now. So,
mm,
and I don't make any apologies about it. I'm my political leanings. If you follow me on social media, you know exactly what they are. So I'm not worried about it. But at the same time, I still want the facts. I still want
mm,
to be able to trust what I'm
mhm,
reading. And so often
mhm.
I end up having to double check and triple check somebody else's source
Yeah.
because I don't trust
Yeah.
that they did. So
Right.
thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
saying that. Oh no, absolutely. So let me I we could talk about this till the cows come home. It's true. And I don't like using animal metaphors, so sorry, cows. Um, but let's switch gears if you don't mind. You made the
Sure.
switch between journalism and into fiction.
Mhm.
How did you do that? How did that transition go? And what made you decide it was time?
Well, I was working at CNN as a writer. This would have been in probably 88 or 89. And I'd been a White House correspondent, but I wasn't able to make that transition to being a correspondent at CNN. And so writing, is a noble profession, and it paid pretty well. So I was doing that. And and I was working weekends, I think, nights and weekends. And one of the editors I worked with said, "Have you ever thought about becoming a copy editor?" And I hadn't, other than just I edited myself fairly ruthlessly all the way down to when I would be, tracking my piece. I would, still be making, changes to make the copy a little more crisp. And I said, "No, I never had." And he said, "You'd be a great copy editor." What he meant was, I want off nights and weekends, and you'd be a great warm body to replace me. And so, sure enough, I got the job. He got the great shift. I did overnights for the next 7 years. And the thing I discovered is that editing is tedious. It's fault finding. And so the thing that, and it dried up my creativity. It was awful, but it paid well.
Hmm.
And so that's when I began starting to play with writing on the side. But the transition to fiction was delayed because I didn't really know how to do that. All I knew was just the facts, ma'am. And so I was researching a biography of a friend of mine who was murdered in South Georgia in the mid 70s. And so I was interviewing his wife, interviewing his mistress. It was going to be a good book.
Hmm.
I had good sources. But there were a couple of problems. One, it was time consuming. Two, it was expensive because I was, going to different places in the country to do interviews. And I was also finding stuff about him that his family didn't know, which was causing a lot of consternation with them. And so his ex-wife actually asked me to put the project on the shelf. And I was more than willing to do that. And then I began to turn my attention to teaching myself how to write fiction.
Hmm.
And what I ended up doing is taking some of my research for this project and folding it into the storyline of my first novel, which took 10 years to get published because it took me that long to find the agent that I got.
Hmm. Wow. So you fictionalized parts of the research that you had done and put
Right.
it into the novel. Interesting. So that
Yep.
actually
Yeah.
leads me beautifully into the next question. What is different between writing journalism or reporting the news and writing fiction? Aside, of course, from the fact that journalism is supposed to be based on truth and facts and fiction doesn't have to be. What's different about it?
The thing that's different is that you know what? There are actually more similarities than differences.
Excellent.
I've talked to people in bookstores who say, "No, I don't read novels. I just read, history or, only factual stuff." But the interesting thing about writing fiction is that you can still be factual, and at the same time, you are creating characters or drawing from your own life experience and making a composite character. Who can make some of these factual situations come alive because you're much better able to get inside the life of an individual in a way you can't journalistically. And the another similarity is that uh, good writing for a journalist means being succinct because you only have either so much airtime or so much space. And so the challenge is to say what you need to say in as efficient a way as possible. Also, if you are trying to capture what you see in your mind's eye, that's like being a reporter because you're trying to take what you're observing and then translate that onto the page. So in a very real sense, being a novelist is no different than being a journalist. The only difference is that there are times when you are making things up. And in real journalism, unlike what some presidents will tell you, it's a firing offense. But in novel writing, it gets the job done.
And it brings the sizzle, of course. Yeah, it's interesting. I in my first two fiction books, I they take place partially in New York, and I infused places that some of which are real in the books, and some of which I made up. And I've
Mhm.
had fans go, "So which are real and which are made up?" And I've had fans go to
Mhm.
87th in Amsterdam, where I placed this really cool ice cream store, looking
Mhm.
for the jumping cow, and of course it doesn't exist. And so I've gotten angry emails.
Right.
I went to
Yeah,
87th in Amsterdam and it
I
wasn't
know.
there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and it's fun to interweave the real and the fantastical.
Well,
But
why did you place, an ice cream store at that particular location? Why would you do such a thing?
well, for me personally, it's right in the building where my grandmother lived when we
Mhm.
immigrated. We got placed in Detroit, my sort of nuclear family and I. My grandmother got placed on the Upper West Side, and she lived at 87th in Amsterdam. So when I was looking for a place to put my
Yep.
fictional ice cream store, that's where I chose.
You
So
write what you know. You write what you
exactly.
know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I think that, and we're gonna get into that more too, but I wanna ask you, because I wanna talk to you about how you've related being a White House correspondent to now Lark in your mystery series, being a White House correspondent. But before we get there, I want to ask you, because I'm a mystery dork, I love mysteries. What drew you to write this kind of, it's almost like a hybrid between a mystery and a suspense thriller? What makes them an exciting topic for you? What made you decide this is what you were going to write about?
Well, I stumbled onto it because one of the things I teach in my writing classes is one of the classes I teach is how to write a novel. And I basically look at the process from 30,000 feet up so that you can see all of the moving parts. And one of the moving parts is to know what your genre is. And the and that's important when it comes time to finding an agent and finding a reader and all that kind of stuff. And the thing that I discovered, and of course a lot of my teaching comes out of the mistakes I made and the things I learned when I taught myself. um, for the longest time, I mean, my first novel, Fast Track, went through 14 major revisions,
Hmm.
and the agent I have is like the 39th agent I queried. And probably about the 12th draft, I was living in Atlanta and there was a book club that met in our neighborhood. And they agreed to read the manuscript over the summer and then let me sit in on their critique. And I write as a woman, which is another question you may want to go to.
It's the next
So,
question, in fact.
okay. So, there are 25 women who are taking my novel apart while I'm sitting there listening, which was very instructive, very intimidating. And the thing I noticed is that I had three subplots that I didn't need. And by extracting them from the manuscript, it went from a 150,000 word mishmash to a 75,000 word mystery suspense novel. So I didn't know my genre until I got that kind of really helpful feedback from the Princeton Lakes book club. And that's when I discovered what my genre was, way down the pike. So I stumbled into it. That wasn't the kind of stuff I read.
Interesting. So fascinating. And it is interesting how it takes sometimes somebody else to go, well, wait a minute, what did you mean here? Or wait, why is
Mhm,
this even
mhm.
here? For you to
Right.
go, maybe it doesn't need to be. I have a number of beta readers for my work, and I'm so
Mhm.
grateful that they're willing to read my my drafts and tell me
Oh
what
man,
I'm doing wrong and what I'm doing potentially right. It's
they're
so
golden.
wonderful.
They're golden.
They
Yeah.
really are. They absolutely are. So yeah, it's funny that you talked about Lark being a woman and you writing a woman. It's, you chose to do this, to write as a young, a beautiful, attractive, flawed,
Yeah.
intelligent, firecracker of a woman. How did you arrive at her as your main character? What made you decide to write her, and also her the way you wrote her?
Well, thank you for saying what you're saying about Lark. I feel very close to her. The 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 way it came about, I stumbled into it when at the very beginning, when I was thinking of starting to write fiction, someone suggested that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. Never been a woman, at least not in this life. So I gave it a try. And I discovered that it was accessible to me. And the reason that it was accessible is that I discovered that emotions aren't gender specific. We
Hmm.
all have the exact same emotions: fear, anger, joy, whatever. It's just that in my experience, it's the women who are much more willing to express their emotions. They're much more articulate about their emotions, and the women in my life are more emotionally nuanced. They have a palette of emotions to draw from when they do express themselves. And so, and then it also helped to have women as my beta readers, because I was at CNN for 25 years. So that's 25 years worth of young women in their early to mid 20s, interns, new hires, who would tell me their stories about their boyfriends, their careers, their families. And I would, because I'm a shy person, I'm listening to their stories and internalizing them.
Hmm.
And so in many ways, Lark is informed by that. But I'll say one more quick thing, because that's the superficial reason. There's
Hmm.
actually a much more in-depth reason. Um, and I didn't find that out until many years later. One of the things I teach about in my writing classes is being able to plumb your subconscious when
Hmm.
you write. and not try to write to be fancy, but to try to write to find out what's really going on in your own life. And so, um, and so Lark is in many ways informed by my subconscious. But here's the interesting thing. My son went missing about 11 years ago. 22 years old. He'd been a cook at a high-end restaurant in the DC area, and he just went missing, didn't come home one night. And that was out of character for him. And
Mm-hmm.
he was missing for a week. And long story short, he was found dead in my car about a block and a half away from where we lived in Washington. And it was an accidental heroin overdose.
Oh.
So I had to identify his body at the morgue, and I met a representative there from the Went Center for Loss and Healing, where I ended up going to grief counseling for probably 2.5 years. And my grief counselor, Adrienne Kraft, is a woman and wanted to know, why do you write as a woman? So I told her what I just told you, the superficial reason. 2.5 years later, after I left grief counseling, the Went Center asked me to give a speech at a banquet as a fundraiser, at a fundraiser.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was writing my talk, I realized that the deeper reason that I write as a woman is that I'm trying to create the kind of person I wish my sister had allowed herself to become, because she killed herself in 1980. She was brilliant. She could have been a surgeon, a concert pianist, and her boyfriend at the time said, "What would it look like, a football coach married to a surgeon?"
Hmm.
And one by one, she gave up her dreams until 20 years later, after, just before they celebrated their 20th anniversary, she went into the garage, closed the door, turned on the gas, and ended it. And so that's the first chapter of Fast Track, which was a
Mm-hmm.
catharsis. And the thing that I was realizing as I was writing this speech is that a lot of the women I was meeting at CNN and talking to about their lives, they were the antithesis of my sister, because they didn't let a guy define who they were. They still had shortcomings. But they weren't victims. And so that is the kind of character I created. It's not even really a glorified version of my sister. It's sort of me with a skirt on. Um, but in a sense, channeling a lot of these really smart, wise women who I've been blessed to know in my life and still do in many cases. And so when they became my beta readers, then that helped to make sure that Lark's voice was authentic.
Wow. First, I am so sorry for so much grief and so much loss in your own life. That's incredible that you are able to, in some ways, process and infuse Lark and these books with so much of your own story, but in a really powerful way. Lark is not a shrinking violet. She's a strong woman. And I love that about her.
Thank you.
I do. Is this why she's had so much grief? I mean, she's had a in the series, we see her life unfold. We see,
Mm.
her many things have gone wrong for her. I don't want to give away any plot points, but is that why? Can you talk about what made you choose to have her such a troubled past and even present? I mean, life isn't easy for her for sure.
Boy, that's a question I'll probably need to be processing in my journal tomorrow. I don't know that. I mean, one of my beta readers said, "Now you can't have her, having more of these troubles." But as a writer, you have to you throw the kitchen sink at your character, and I don't think I really started out to give Lark such a challenging life. You do. I mean, I do try to draw from my own experience, and there certainly has been grief and loss. But I mean, we all have grief and loss. So I mean, I don't think I'm unique in that sense. Um, and I think it's safe to say Lark has certainly experienced a lot more grief and loss than I have, and many people have. But we're already coming up on the sixth book, so it's an accumulation of stuff that she's got to fight, that most people would buckle under, I think. But I don't know, Isolde, if I can give you a really articulate answer on that, other than I'm drawing from personal experience and then trying to make sense of it and trying to create a character who really is strong and in her weakness, strong in spite of her weaknesses, because life is a struggle, um, and I think that's why we read books, to not necessarily to escape, but to maybe learn or find something that's relatable or something that resonates with us. And if that's the case, then figuring out anything deeper about the why is it's certainly elusive in this answer.
It actually isn't elusive. I understand what you're saying exactly, that sometimes we don't have to have the conscious answers, but there are threads that we can grab onto and go, I wonder where this leads me. And it
Mhm.
sounds like in some ways Lark informs your subconscious, and then of course your subconscious informs
Yeah.
her. So,
Hmm.
and I think that's a great answer, and it made a lot of sense to me. And it
Good.
is
Thank you.
interesting. It is interesting. Oh, absolutely. It is interesting to me, though, that in reading the books, what happens to Lark, and this is something I'd love for you to talk about, if you would. Other people tell her how strong she is, but she doesn't seem to believe it. And I would
Hmm.
love to know, what's that about? Like, she doesn't credit herself with how far she's come. Like, what's going on with her, that when somebody says to her, "Wow, you're really strong," her immediate answer seems to be either "No, I'm not," or "I don't feel strong," or something like that. What makes her this way, do you think?
I think it's because of the conversations that I've had with women in my life who I
Hmm.
consider to be strong. And when I point that out to them, they say the exact same thing. They say, well, no, I don't feel I am. And this also goes to what I've discovered as a writing teacher. I'll give you one example.
Hmm.
Um, I was teaching at the University of Wisconsin in Madison at the Right by the Lake program, and I'm going to be doing it again this June, but online. But last year I was teaching it. It was a week-long class, so we had 3 hours in the morning, so people had a chance to read some of their stuff, and then I'd teach a little bit and build on what we were doing. So on Monday, the woman to my left, I'll call her Miss Amazing, read something and it was brilliant. I mean, it was fabulous. I can't write like that. And the woman on my right, had just gotten out of the army. She was, and I think she was a master sergeant in the army or something like that. She kept calling me sir, and I kept saying, if you keep doing that, I'm going to have you drop and give me 20 push-ups. And one of the things I said after Miss Amazing read is I said, look, it's very tempting to compare yourself as a writer with something, that you think that you can't do. And that's really the point I'm making in this story about Lark's inferiority, is that I think writers in general, and not just writers, I think people in general, we compare ourselves to each other, and we feel that we fall short. So on Tuesday, when Miss Amazing read again, I gave the same pep talk. Don't compare yourself. You be you, because you're here because you feel you've got something to say. The sergeant said, I'm going to read on Thursday. Okay, that's a moral victory. I'll be fine with that. On Wednesday, Miss Amazing read again, and the sergeant said, I'm going to read now. And she read out loud what she had written, and Miss Amazing cried. Everybody else gave her an ovation, and I dropped and gave her, well, not 20 push-ups, but 4 push-ups, because what she'd written was way different in style than Miss Amazing had done, but it was effective.
Hmm.
And that's really the point of it. And here's the kicker. She told me afterwards, she said, I've been coming to this conference for 4 years in a row, and I've never read out loud before. So
Wow.
the point I'm making is that I think, as human beings, have a tendency to compare ourselves to other people and feel that we're falling short. And all too often, we give up before we've even had a chance to find out what we're made of.
Absolutely. And I can't agree more. And one of the things I tell my clients too is, if you're not going to tell your story, who's going to tell it for you? That's
Hmm.
that's the ultimate, that's the one sentence sort of encapsulation of everything I feel about what you just said. We all have a story to tell, and no one's going to tell your story unless you're the one who stands up and tells it or writes it.
Or if they do tell it, they'll get it wrong.
Yeah, and that brings us back to that whole fact checking thing. Our
Right.
conversation is a spiral. I love it. So let's talk a little bit further, if you don't mind, about the books as a series. They're all standalone, although I recommend people read them all because you do get more information. You do get more about Lark. You do get more about the stories and the people in her life if you read the whole series. But how do you work that process? How do you lay out the timeline and the plots? Is everything in your head already, or do you sort of let inspiration strike you as you begin each new chapter in Lark's life?
Well, I didn't even start out to write a series, to be honest. I think I
Hmm.
just wanted to write and get a book published. And so I stumbled into the series because by the time I finished the first novel, I had some ideas for subsequent ones.
Hmm.
And this is actually not a bad idea because often an agent will say, well, what else are you working on?
Hmm.
And because it's a business and they don't want to just represent a one hit wonder, they're interested in longevity. Um, the other thing is that I don't just crank them out. I've got some friends who are under contract to turn out a book every 9 months. To
Hmm.
me, that would be like writing with a gun at your head. And so that then gives me the luxury of having things percolate.
Hmm.
And so in fact, I was on my walk today because I'm in procrastination mode on book 6. I've been playing with it, but I haven't really gotten to the point where I'm writing the first draft because I don't have the bigger story that I need to attach it to.
Hmm.
And so I came up with a couple of ideas that might work that might be related to the coronavirus. I'm not sure if I'm even going to use that in the story or not, but it's almost impossible to ignore right now.
Sure.
So I really I only have enough light for the next couple of steps,
Hmm.
and so I don't crank them out. I think about them and do. I've got plenty of other things I'm doing in my life, so that gives me time to, have ideas take root, gel, and come together.
And for your fans to sit with bated breath. Thanks very much, John.
Yeah, right. I definitely left. I ended fake with some loose ends that definitely need to be, if not tied up, at least woven into the next story.
Right. Well, addressed. We'll call it addressed. They need to be addressed. So yeah, that's the next question actually that I wanted to ask you is I don't want to give up too many details of the book because, people should read it. Your writing is so clear and so crisp and lovely that I just, if you're listening to this, read the book. That's all I have to say. Uh, what can you tell me about Fake? What, without giving too much away, what, give me the thing that'll make people sit up and take notice.
Well, by the time Fake starts, Lark has a professional relationship with the first lady, and so the first we know. Well, I don't want to give too much of it away either. So I'll just say that she's interviewing the first lady in the residential quarters of the White House when the first lady dies, and that then, of course, launches the story. And we have met the first lady and the president to be in Troubled Water, which is the third novel I wrote. Fake is the fifth. So those characters start in Troubled Water and have evolved. And Fake, I started writing right after Trump was elected,
Hmm.
and I was aghast at the whole fake news allegations that he was making and the attacks on journalists. I mean, I've had friends who've covered him, and they've had to have police escorts to their car because of uh, the anger that he uh, gins up against the reporters.
Amazing.
And so I'm really troubled by that. But I did not set out to write an anti-Trump screed, because truth is not on one side or the other. And so the story I wanted to tell, and which I really try to tell in all my novels, is to give people a glimpse behind the scenes as to how journalism really operates.
Mm-hmm.
And, to a certain extent, it's like watching the sausage made because it ain't pretty. And, if you are a person who does believe that the news media has got problems, well, you'll find them in there. And that's true. I mean, I can't tell you how many arguments I've either witnessed or been involved in newsrooms when we argue about what's the news and how we're going to cover it. So, so that's what I try to do. And so in Fake, I bring in the Me Too movement because Lark is certainly on the receiving end of a lot of unwanted attention from guys, and she has to manage that. She is attracted to the president, but she is grieving her own loss, as is the president. And if you don't mind, I would like to read you just a 2-minute snippet, if you don't mind, to give
I
you a sense of this.
I'd love
Okay.
that. That would be great. Yes, please.
Thank you. There are actually a couple of different ones that I can do, but the ones that I usually read in public give people a sense of what it's like to be a journalist or on the receiving end of stuff. So the scene I want to read takes place about 2/3 of the book, 2/3 of the way into the story. By this time, we know that Lark is the subject of a fake news story that's out there, and it's an allegation that she's had an affair with the president. We know as the reader that it's not true. And so her life is a mess as usual in these books. And so she's been sitting at a sidewalk cafe in DC called Bread and Chocolate. It's not named in the book, but it's by Chevy Chase Circle near where I used to live. And so she's been journaling just like a fiend, which is the way I sort things out. And that's the way Lark is doing it too. When she gets done and she's packing up, she realizes that there's a guy who's been watching her, and they strike up a conversation. And he's the kind of guy that she'd be interested in, but she's just not on the market at the moment. But he's been trying to pick her up, and we pick up the scene a little bit into it after they've been talking. And he says to her, "I just figured it out," he said, his face brightening. "What's that?" "You're what's her name, the president's girlfriend." Now I was intrigued. "What gives you that impression?" "Well, it's all over the internet." He dug into his pocket, extracted his cell phone, and did some serious scrolling. "Here it is." He thrust his phone toward me so I could see the picture of Gannon, the president, with his hand on my shoulder. "You're Lark Chadwick, Miss Fake News herself," he said proudly. "So glad to have made your day." I stood. "Me too. Say, is he any good in bed?" "I think we're through here, Jake." "Hell, we're just getting started." His expression darkened and hardened. "Why do you liberal media types hate this country so much?" "You don't even know me, Jake." "Oh, I know your type. While I'm getting shot at in Afghanistan, you're banging the president, as his wife is dying, no less." I should have walked away. Instead, I took a deep breath, pulled my chair over to his wrought iron table, sat down, folded my arms on top of the table, and leaned toward him. "A minute ago, you're trying to pick me up," I said, "trying to impress me with how rich you are, trying to flatter me about how hot I look. And then when you realize I'm a journalist, you judge me based on information that's not even true. But do you even..." He grabbed me by the forearm and squeezed so hard it hurt. "Ow!" He stuck his face in front of mine, lowered his voice, gritted his teeth, and hissed, "Listen to me, you stuck up snowflake little bitch. In Afghanistan, I killed better people than you." "Let go of me," I demanded, my stern, even tone matching his. We were eyeball to eyeball. He tightened his grip. "You need to be taught a lesson." His eyes were wild, crazed. I'll stop there.
Woo. Yeah, I remember that scene. It taught. I will call it taught. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you for doing that. Is there anything else you'd like to read out of the book?
I would, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. We have no time limit here, so as much as you want to read, I would be delighted to hear it.
I have two choices. I'll let you be the judge.
Mm-hmm.
There's one, it's the scene in National Cathedral just before the First Lady's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And often I read this to give an example of the fact that reporters are biased. They are human beings. The trick is that they need to be able to take the bias out of they need to extract that or set it aside when they actually write their stories. So Lark is in National Cathedral ruminating about God. The
Mm-hmm.
other is a conversation that Lark has with herself on Air Force One. The president has given her his personal phone number. Now there's a bombshell story that some whack job media blog has just launched, and she needs to confirm it. She doesn't know if it's true or not, and so she's debating with herself on whether or not to text the president.
Ooh, I remember both scenes. I love both scenes. If you're willing to read both, I'd love it. If not, the conversation between the two Larks was informative and also hilarious. So that's the one I'd love for you to read, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay. So Lark is on Air Force One, and hold on, my book is falling apart here. And every now and then I do this in my books where I have Lark argue with herself, because there's sort of a good Lark and a bad Lark. And in this case, I label them responsible Lark and selfish Lark. Um, so Lark is deciding whether or not to text the president. Responsible Lark, don't text him. Selfish Lark, why not? Responsible Lark, because he probably gave you his cell phone number as a personal gesture. So, so it means that he'd be pissed if you took advantage of his personal gesture to crassly work a story. Selfish Lark. But if it's a personal gesture, then he wants me to get personal with him. Yeah, maybe, but that's the problem. What's the problem? He's a hunk and he's into me. Responsible Lark. Yeah, and that's the problem. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Why? Because if you text him about a story you're working, then you're taking advantage of his generosity. You're being selfish. But if you text him and say, hey, you little stud muffin, let's hang, that's not you being selfish. I would never do that because I'm too boring. I was going to say responsible. Still boring. Responsible Lark, silent, sulking. Besides, who says stud muffin? Selfish Lark, smelling blood and moving in for the kill. So let me see if I understand this. Because you're so responsible, I hear that cynical tone. Don't interrupt. Responsible Lark, petulantly. But you did. Yes, but I was being selfish. It's my nature. Responsible Lark, sighing. Go on. Selfish Lark. As I was saying, explain to me how you're being a responsible journalist if you decide not to use the special access you have with the president to check out this bombshell story. Responsible Lark. Um, right. Just as I thought. Try using the I was just being responsible argument on your editor when you get scooped by Reuters. My thumbs were trembling as I typed this text to President Gannon. It's Lark. I need to talk with you. Alone. It's urgent. I take a deep breath to keep from hyperventilating, and then I hit send. Selfish Lark, smugly. Nicely done, Lark, but you're so selfish.
I love that scene. That was so much fun.
It was fun to write. It was fun to write.
But and it captures the angel and the devil sitting on your shoulder, having a
You've never
conversation.
had that happen to you, have you?
Oh no, never. At least 4 or 5 times a day, I think. So, yeah, sad but true. So, let me ask you a quick question about the other characters, because you've got great characters in the books that aren't Lark. How do you
Mhm,
develop them? Lark, I understand, is an amalgam of sort of your own subconscious and the many women in your life who've informed her.
mhm.
But what about some of the other characters? Lionel comes to mind. Where do they come from? How do you develop them? Do you keep character sheets?
Hmm.
What do you do to make them come to life?
Well, you obviously assume I'm more organized than I really am. Um, Lionel is Lark's mentor, and she meets him when she's trying to look into her past, because the fast track, the first story starts out when she discovers the body of the aunt who raised her from infancy after her parents had been killed in a car accident. And when Lark discovers the body, that's pretty much that's pretty tragic, because that's her real connection to her own past. And so she goes to the small town in southern Wisconsin where the accident happened, gets a newspaper clipping, and she discovers she's the miracle baby who survived a car train collision. Nobody had ever told her about that. So she convinces Lionel Stone, who's the newspaper editor, to let her do a follow up story on the crash. Now, Lionel is an interesting guy because, again, he's a composite. One of the guys I worked with at CBN in Virginia Beach, Bob Slosser, was a former assistant national editor at the New York Times before he founded the CBN News in Virginia Beach. And so that was a connection that I had to a person who, was at the New York Times during Kennedy's presidency, during the assassination, during Vietnam. And so I remember peppering him with all kinds of questions about that. And so a lot of Lionel is made up of Bob Schlosser. Although Bob was a much kinder and gentler person, Lionel is much more irascible, and which is probably where I come in again, because that's one of my personality traits. I guess I have sort of a choleric personality, and so some of me is in look, all of me is in some of, I'm in all of my characters in
Of
one way or
course.
another. It's just the way it is, that.
Sure.
Um, but so Lionel is a mentor, and so I get, I've been a mentor to people. I mean, I don't really set out to be that, but they say you're my mentor, and I go, oh, okay, that's a lot of pressure. um, but but I'm a dad, so and Lionel can be a dad, and that got him into trouble with his daughter. Not this then exaggerates my own relationship with my kids, but I can certainly be, I can certainly understand the parent who cares so much about their kid that they can be overbearing, and so that's another side of Lionel that is fleshed out in Bluff, which is the second novel. So I don't know. I mean, there's he's a composite, and he's a fun character too. Um, his wife Muriel, I don't know as well. I'm getting to know her better as the stories unspool. I only have a few characters that go from book to book. Paul Stone is another one. That's Lionel's son, who works with Lark at the Associated Press, and that is another loose end that we're going to be dealing with in the next book.
And you left that a pretty big loose end for sure. Yeah, and it is interesting to me to hear you talk about Lionel and Muriel in the way you just did, because throughout the books, we get to see Lionel. Lionel may keep things hidden, but I think he's probably gotten to the point in his life where he's like, I don't have to hide a thing. Whereas
Yep.
Muriel is more circumspect,
Mm-hmm.
reading her, thinking, sort of trying to get inside her head. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if this idea of not knowing her as well, if perhaps you don't know her as well, is because as a character, she's a little bit more mysterious,
Boy.
just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, just
I
go ahead.
think I think you're onto something. I hear my wife's voice a lot in Muriel,
Hmm.
um, but I can't say that Cindy is Muriel. That's a stretch.
Hmm.
But I do hear her voice, and my wife is one of my tougher interviews. I mean, she she knows. I only get three questions with her. It's like, how was your day? Oh, what about that? And usually one more, and then she goes, and that's all I want to say about that. And so she's hard. She's a tougher nut to crack.
Hmm.
And although I may interview her on one of my podcasts if she'll let me. But
Fabulous.
getting back to Muriel, well, that's part of the process, and that's part of the joy of life, I think, because, people are discoverable, but not always. Sometimes they're elusive, and
Sure.
we don't know everyone in our life the way we would like to. Sometimes they kind of prefer it that way, And so I guess it's inadvertent, quite honestly, that I don't know her as well as I'd like, but I'm intrigued.
And if there are going to be more Lark Chadwick books, I imagine Muriel and Lionel are going to play a role in those books. So we may get to know her better as you get to know her better, which I think is great.
Thank you.
So let's shift gears a little bit, if you don't mind. You've been giving us these tantalizing bits and pieces of the fact that you are a teacher and that you do writing workshops and things like that. And I can attest you're a fantastic teacher. I said that up front.
Thank you.
So
Thank
oh, my pleasure. And because of that, I feel like I can, sing your praises from the rooftops. But I want to ask you, uh, what what is it that you're trying to teach, and how do you go about teaching people when you have a workshop called Novice to Novelist, which I think is a phenomenal name. Uh, but it means, hey, you're a rank beginner. You might be afraid to put words down on a page, and from there, we're going to get you to writing a novel or far on the way. How do you start? How do you get your students to start opening up that part of themselves? Because that can be the first sentence is one of the toughest, and I
hmm
often tell the people I work with to help them learn how to write, don't start with the first sentence. Start in the
hmm
middle somewhere else. What do you do to help them open themselves up to start writing?
Whew, well, part of it is that I guess there's a certain degree of empathy because I guess what I try to do as a teacher is to capture what I remember feeling when I was floundering and not sure about how to go about doing it. And so I've been able to identify the different elements that are involved in becoming a novelist. And so the part of the job is already done for me because when they're in the class, they're there because they really want to learn. And that certainly makes all the difference. I mean, any middle school teacher will tell you how difficult teaching is when these kids just, not only are their hormones raging, but they're there
Mm.
because they don't want to be there. And so, really, middle school English is probably crowd control more than anything. And I don't have that problem. I've got people who are motivated. And so they're really there just to learn. And I'm just there to basically say, I've been there too. These are the things that I've learned in the process. So I guess what I'm trying to do is just to help them relax into it and be informed about what to expect. Because I think a lot of times in my experience, people will you'll wake up from a dream or you'll get out of the shower and it's like this idea has just fallen whole into your lap and you have this writing enthusiasm and you write white hot for maybe 50 pages and you're just trucking along and you're gonna write the great American novel until you get to about page 50 and then you realize there are a lot more moving parts than you anticipated. You're overwhelmed, you hit the wall, and you put it away in discouragement, thinking you have no business being a writer because obviously you can't finish. And so the one of the things that I try to do is encourage people to just do the prep work, do the spade work. If you've got an idea, start playing with it and exploring it before you start writing prematurely. And the inner barometer is when you can't really, when you've gotten to know your characters and you've sketched out your plot and you have an idea of where it's going to end. That's the time to write. So you're sort of like at the horse at the Kentucky Derby, waiting for the bell to go off and the doors to spring open so that you can race down the track. That's when it's time to write, as opposed to just feeling like, I think I've got this story I want to tell. So that's what I try to do. It's you know I guess it's a matter of just encouraging. I mean, that's probably if there's gonna be anything on my gravestone, it's gonna be he tried to encourage. Um, Another one could be I told you I was sick, but
My husband says
but
he's going to put mine is going to be there's just so much to do. That's going to be
yeah, but encouragement. I just try to help people realize that this idea that they've got, this desire that they've got, that came from somewhere, and then it's just a matter of what are you going to do to explore it and act on it.
See, now that's the thing. It's that what you just that last sentence, what are you going to do to explore it and act on it is
Hmm.
it's so telling because I know lots of people who have ideas. Oh, I've
Hmm.
got this great, and I've had people, I don't know if this has happened to you. I've had people say, I've got this great idea for a book. Let me tell it to you and you can write it. And I'm like,
Yeah. Oh,
I've
yeah.
write,
Yeah.
I'm writing my own books. Uh,
Right.
so where do they start? What do you suggest they do first? If you're talking to someone who's just said the words, I've always wanted to write a book, but I have no
Mhm.
idea how to start. What would you say to them?
Take my class. No, I think that,
Absolutely.
well, look, I think if you've got an idea, start exploring it. And there are several ways you can go about doing it. And probably one of them will be right for you. Um, the great thing about writing is that it's like dipping a straw into your subconscious, and the act of writing stirs things up, and it just goes from your subconscious through your fingers and onto the page.
Hmm.
And so just start exploring that. Maybe you put that idea into words so that it's there objectively, so that you can look at it. um, and that then can be the stepping stone for the next thing. If you've got a concept, let's say that you've got this idea about writing a story about a jaded weatherman who has to cover Punxsutawney Phil yet again and is doomed to live the same day over and over again until he gets it right. That's a concept. And
Right?
some people, have these concepts. Write it down and then follow your curiosity and ask yourself, well, where does this jaded weatherman live? Well, probably Pennsylvania or nearby.
Hmm.
And why is he jaded? And, just ask these questions and then answer them onto the page. And really, and I think you would attest to this as well, because you write, it's just a matter of discovery. Writing is a way of discovering the story. And it's also a matter of self discovery, because I think that there's a direct connection between effective writing and effective self knowledge. The better you know yourself, the more you're going to be able to draw articulately from your stuff and put it down. So, following your curiosity about the story that you've got, and building those characters step by step, bit by bit, is, I think, a good place to start.
That's a terrific place to start. Thank you for that answer because I think there are people out there, many people, who would love to write but have no idea
Mhm.
what that first step is.
Yeah.
And it's tough because it's your story and you're trying to tell it. And as a novice writer, like you said about Ms. Amazing and the woman from the military. The
Mhm.
woman from the military, she years she went without reading her work out loud, and yet it
Mhm.
was amazing. It's in its
Mhm.
own right, you know. So I
In its
think,
own right. Mhm.
yeah, and I think it's so wonderful to have someone who encourages you to keep striving, and I think that's what you're doing. I remember in the workshop I took with you, that's what it was. You wrote you signed fast track for me and you said something along the lines of keep writing, you've got this. And I thought
Wow.
that
Wow.
was lovely. And
Thank you.
I thought, wow, because I was at a I was pretty, I'd written nonfiction books, but I had not written a lot of fiction books. And
Mhm.
so that was, it's a different animal as far as I'm concerned. So I was very nervous about it. And to hear you say that about the story that I wrote in that workshop was very powerful for me. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for that too. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. So let's move along because I know you have a life to get back to. I know that you do these little tidbit writing videos on LinkedIn. I've
Mhm.
seen those and I've noted them very carefully. Where else can people find your teaching? If someone wanted to take a John DeDakis workshop, where would
Mm.
they go? What would they need to do that?
Probably the best thing. I mean, I haven't updated my website in a while, so ever since the coronavirus hit, a lot of my things have been either canceled or moved online.
Hmm.
So, but my website is one place. johndedakis.com. But as far as specific writing classes, I've been doing a lot of them on scheduling them through Eventbrite.
Hmm.
And I think if you were to search for my name on Eventbrite, then that's often where we post the upcoming writing classes. I'm also going to be teaching at the University of Wisconsin's Right by the Lake program in June, and also at the Loft, which is a literary center in Minneapolis. But again, both of those gigs went online, so that's where they'll be. And so at this moment, we're being taped in mid-May, and I don't think this is going to air until June. So I don't I don't know other than what I've just mentioned. But Eventbrite will be a good one-stop shopping, where if there is something that's going to be offered, it'll be there. And the good thing is that it's online. So if you live in Timbuktu, we can do this.
Absolutely. And that's one of the pluses of this whole time of sheltering at home is that a lot of things that we didn't realize would work online work brilliantly online. So
Mhm.
it's really nice to have that as a resource. And I will find you on Eventbrite, and I will put your links up on the show notes page, as well as, of course, your website and your LinkedIn profile, but also you're on Facebook. So where is it?
Mhm.
Is it John DeDakis? Should I just find
Mhm.
it on there and put it on there?
Yeah, I've got a group page, I've got a fan page. I hate to call it a fan page, but that's what Facebook calls it. And I've got my own personal page, but all of them are public. So that's another place to find me.
Great. I'll find you.
I'm on Twitter, but I'm not very effective. I'll never be president.
Thank goodness you're not using Twitter the way he uses Twitter. That's all I have to say. So
Yeah.
I just have a couple of more questions, and I keep saying that. I've said that for the last half hour. Talk to me about your nascent podcast. You sprung it on me right before we started recording. What's that all about? One to one with John DeDakis. Talk to me about that. What prompted it, and what are you going to do with it?
Well, I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I've been interviewed on a lot of, what is it, Blog Talk Radio, and, this interview right now. And, I've been interviewed a lot, but I'm also comfortable asking a lot of questions. I love to talk to people, but instinctively I've just been feeling that it's a time suck for me to start launching a podcast because I edit people's manuscripts, I'm doing these teaching things, oh by the way I write. So it's been on the back burner for a long time, but I came across something called StreamYard, and it's basically you just go right to air. You do it live.
Hmm.
And my friend Brianna Bowling in southern Maryland, I met her at a writing workshop I led, and she invited me to be on her podcast, and we were talking about the technology of it. And so I actually interviewed her uh, as and I did it live. I mean, I was going to tape it, and she said, "Why do you want to tape it?" I said, "Well, I don't know, because I don't want to screw up on live. I don't want to screw up in front of everybody." And she said, "Well, that's not a big deal." I mean, one of the things we talked about was being an entrepreneur, and one of the main attributes and needed for an entrepreneur is fearlessness.
Hmm.
And so, here I am with my self doubt, and she's going, "Stop it." So we just did it live, and it seemed to go okay. And that was the first one yesterday. She's very articulate, very interesting. But now I've got some ideas for other guests, and it's not official yet, although our interview is out there. But I'm thinking of calling it One to One with John DeDakis, and then each episode would be one to one with Isolde Trachtenberg, and
Yay.
different people. I mean, I know a lot of people who are interesting.
Hmm.
And so when you say nascent, it is so nascent it almost isn't. So so you're helping me to think it through, and to give me that added encouragement to give it a try.
Oh, I think you should. I think it would be really
Thank you.
fun to get your take on things. And you are a skilled interviewer, so you would really bring out valuable information from the people who were guests on your show. And
Thank
just so you know, again, no affiliate money from this, but Podbean, which is where my podcast is hosted, you can do live interviews also. I didn't mention that when we were
Ah,
chatting about it before, so you can. Okay, well, that's awesome. I would love, I would be proud to be on the show if you invite me. And also, I'm really glad you're
I have just invited you.
and I have just accepted. Look at us
Oh,
go.
good.
So so let me ask you. You said that you ruminate a lot for writing, and you don't hold yourself to a particular schedule. Do you
Mhm.
structure your writing at all when you are writing? Do you have a routine? And if so, what is it?
I do, but I really try to stay away from being legalistic because I think that that can be a straitjacket. So I try to be, to a certain extent, flexible and nimble. I find that I'm most effective writing earlier in the morning. I mean, I journal like a fiend, and that's pretty much the first thing I do when I get up, which, since I'm retired, I can get up whenever I want. And since I worked overnights at CNN for so long, my body is bludgeoned into submission. So I
Hmm.
only need about 5 hours of sleep at a time. So,
Hmm.
I can often, wake up early and, whatever fiction writing I'm doing, I'm best doing it in the morning. And if I can get an hour in, that's fine. If I get 2 hours in, that's inadvertent, but great. If I get 5 hours in, it just means that I'm in a panic and I'm in a deadline and it's got to get done. But more often than not, I'm in procrastination mode, which means then I'm thinking about it, but I'm not necessarily writing. And I think that's also important for a wannabe writer to keep in mind, because if you're ruminating, you're writing. That's part of the process. And you might be an automaton who can write 1,000 words a day, but how do you feel about yourself when you only do 800 or 200 or zero? And so I'm just realistic about who I am and how I approach it. So creative writing is best for me in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I'm dealing more with marketing and emails and editing people's manuscripts and teaching myself how to play jazz drums and all that kind of stuff.
Wait. Time out. Did you just say jazz drums?
Yeah, I did.
Ooh, okay. Tell me more, please.
Well, look, this goes back to being shy. All right. When I was in high school, no, actually, when I was in junior high, you may have heard this group called the Beatles.
Oh, I've
Um,
heard of them. Yeah.
you've heard of them. I heard they broke up. I've heard they've broken up. But back then, they were all the rage, and so I taught myself how to play drums by listening to Beatle records
Hmm.
and Ringo Starr. But my sister, who was 8 years older than I, played first chair clarinet in the band, and so I inherited her clarinet, but I did not inherit her skill. So consequently, in spite of the fact that I wanted to play drums, I was stuck playing clarinet, and I was too shy to let my desires be known. I probably could have learned how to play the drums and done a pretty good job at it back in the 60s when it really would have made a difference. So fast forward to about 1996, right? Um, my wife said, "What should we get Dad for Father's Day?" And my son James, who is now a professional drummer in Los Angeles, said, "Let's get him a set of drums," which of course is how James taught himself how to play drums. So um, I basically, played the tapes and stuff in the basement, and just it was, I didn't play in public. I was too shy. And then fast forward again, living in DC, James and I were at a jazz club in DC, and there was an open mic jam session. And I said to him, "James, are you going to play?" He says, "No." And I said, "Well, okay." I should have listened. So instead, I go swaggering up there and sit in. And, the first piece was a pretty basic 4/4 swing, medium swing. I did fine. And then a couple of horn players got up, and I found out later they just played a gig at the Kennedy Center. Look, you're in trouble where the next song you're playing and you're floundering so bad that the house drummer during the song says, I'll take over. So
Oh,
while the piece is still going on, we're trading sticks and I'm getting out of there so that, somebody who really knew what they were doing could do it. Because rock and roll drumming is just basically, you hit the bass, the snare drum on 2 and 4, and, you play straight eighth notes on the ride cymbal, and, you hit your bass drum a couple of times and that's it.
yeah.
Jazz is much more intricate. I mean, to the uninitiated, it might sound like cacophony, but there's a very detailed structure and sociology connected to the whole thing. And
Uh,
so I joined a jazz workshop in Northern Virginia run by Paul Piper, and he brought people together for 2 hour sessions where you play with each other, play jazz with each other, and you learn the culture. You learn about song forms. You learn about soloing, which is like playing. It's like failing all the time, but you learn by failing, and so. I learned what I didn't know, and so it's now going to be a lifelong lesson in, trying to get it right.
well, and that's the thing about jazz is that it feels like there's a lot of give and take, but if you're in the pocket, you're always going to
Hmm.
find your way back to that one. You
Oh,
got
in
to
the
find the
pocket. Do
one.
you play jazz? Are you a
Oh,
jazz aficionado?
oh, I am. I am absolutely. I'm a jazz vocalist, and
Really? Well, you've got a great
yes.
voice. You've
Oh,
got a
thank you.
wonderful voice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's I've been singing since before I was speaking actually. So, um
Wow.
yeah, my mom was a professional vocalist in the Soviet Union where I was born, and
Huh.
so I sang with her before I could speak. I was singing harmony with what she was doing. So, and
Wow.
I'm a big fan of all of the divas, your Sarah Vaughan, your Ella Fitzgerald,
Oh
your
man.
Shirley Bassey, you name it, Billie Holiday,
Wow.
all of the great divas. I love that music. The music of that age is
Are
just.
you doing any gigs?
I mean, right now, no, of course, because everything is
Well,
canceled. But
before this.
yeah, absolutely. And I am cognizant that this is supposed to be me interviewing you, however.
Oh, we'll talk about this in our interview.
No, but yeah, I play mostly on the college circuit, and I
Mhm.
do diversity shows. So I do music from all over the world where I include almost 20 languages. I sing in a bunch of languages, and I infuse it all with jazz as part of the show. So
Wow,
that's
who
when I
knew?
yeah, when I perform music, that's essentially what I do now. But to get
Wow.
back to you, because because otherwise, again, we're going to be here till 5 p.m. Um, I wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple of things. First of all, do you want to tease anything about the next book that you're gonna put out? Maybe.
Well, the look, I have when I after I finished Fake, I had 3 projects that were all basically at the developmental level. There was book 6 of the Lark Chadwick series that I was starting to play with. There was a literary novel that I wanted to write, but that's an entirely different genre, and it's very character driven, and language is critical in it. And so I just know I'm in over my depth, considering that. But I'm playing with that. And then there was a memoir, and I and so what I was doing in my writing time was spending time with each of those, sort of rotating through. And the one that took root, and the one that I'm working on now, is a memoir.
Mm,
And memoir is different than autobiography.
hmm.
It's autobiographical, but the autobiography is everything about your life. And I'm a nobody, so that's not going to sell.
I
I'm not
would.
an ex-president, so you need to, if you're a nobody who's going to write a memoir, you need to come up with something thematic. And
Hmm.
so the theme I'm working with, the working title is Pivot Points. Sometimes life doesn't turn out the way you expect. And so what I've been able to do is identify maybe, I don't know, 15 or 20 pivotal moments in my life that have brought me to the where I am today. And so and I've written about 70,000 words, and I'm only in 1988. So
Wow.
Yeah, it's a first draft, so it's going to need to be whittled. But I'm having fun with that, and it's a little daunting too. But I'm far enough along that I think I'll be able to whittle it into some sort of coherent whole.
And I'm looking forward to it. That's going to be fantastic. I love the
Thank
title.
you.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I know a couple more questions. Sorry.
You're good.
Actually,
I appreciate this. Thank you.
I'm not sorry at all. Let me be honest. I
Hmm.
wanted to find out from you, who do you read? Who are you reading right now? Who are your favorite authors?
Man, I wish I read more widely. I feel like I'm a remedial reader, and I know that whoever I mention, someone will say, well, oh, really? But when I first started getting interested in fiction, it was John Steinbeck. I read Grapes of Wrath in
Mm,
a not high school, a college American history class about the Dust Bowl. And so Grapes of Wrath made history come alive. Um, I like John Grisham. I like Stephen King. I've been reading William Kent Krieger, who's a novelist in Minnesota, and
hmm
I was judge a couple of years ago for the Edgar Awards, and I was getting like, I don't know, 10 books a day in the mail, and we had different teams who, we all got all of the books that were entered, but we only had to read certain ones.
hmm
And once we discovered the ones that were the top ones, then we read all of those. So whenever a book, and my wife reads voraciously, so whenever a book would come in, I'd go, here you go. And I would read as well. And after about the first 50 pages, you can kind of tell if it's going to go anywhere, because you already have a gold standard. And if it's not measuring up, you can't wait till page 200, because you gotta hook me. And I
Right.
think that's true of most readers. So Cindy read Kent's Ordinary Grace, and she said, this is the one. And as it turned out, that was the one, because everybody on our team came to the same conclusion. So Kent Krieger is a really good writer. I like Greg Iles. Um, he writes mystery suspense and very detail oriented. Um, I'm reading a lot of a nonfiction. I'm reading A Very Stable Genius that Phil Rucker co-wrote with the
Mm-hmm.
Washington Post. I'm reading The Loudest Voice in the Room, Gabriel Sherman's book about Roger Ailes, which I find very insightful. You get a much better holistic look at who Ailes was, especially growing up, and that helps me understand why he became the kind of person he became. I'm reading the book. It's called The Library Book, about the major fire that destroyed the Los Angeles Library in 1986, and that's part of our book club. So I'm reading books that I normally wouldn't read.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I wish I read more than I do. I'm reading, obviously, manuscripts that of books that haven't been published yet. So, I'm trying to help them whip them into shape. Um,
I'd
so
say
I don't
that's
know. Does that answer
plenty.
your question? Yeah,
It's
yeah, it
funny.
does.
You keep punctuating what you're saying with "I wish I read more," and then you list another 14 books that you're reading. And wait, I wish I read more. Here's another 4 books I'm reading. I think, I think, I think you're reading plenty. No, it's good to know those authors that spark your imagination and that make you want to read more, because I think I'm going to put some of these books in the show notes just so that people can, once they're done reading all 5 books that you've written,
Hmm.
go ahead and see some of the other writers that you find
Yeah, I'll
interesting
add
and
I'll add
fascinating.
one more.
Hmm
I'll add one more. Brad Parks. He's lives in Northern Virginia. I've started reading some of his books, and his character writes in the first person, as do I.
hmm
Although his protagonist is male and a newspaper reporter, and has sort of lark snarkiness, and again, it's a good fast read, and yet you get a good sense of how journalism operates too.
Oh, that's wonderful. Shedding the facts in with the fiction is wonderful. I love that.
Mm.
So I have one last question, and then I will let
So
you go
you
get it.
say.
I know. This is a silly question, but I find that it's really it's illuminating. And here it is. If you could have an airplane skywrite something for everyone in the world to see, what would you say?
Don't give up.
There you go. Succinct. Perfect. I love it. I love it.
Well, it's only
Somebody,
it's an airplane. There's no room for asterisks and
right, exactly.
second sentence.
It's got to be short and sweet.
Yeah.
Somebody in an interview recently said, "Be kind," and it was the same kind of, "Yep."
Same thing. I
So
could do
just
that too. I wouldn't be in favor of that.
yeah, I just it's really it's an interesting question to me because it
It
does
is.
mean you have to take everything and sort of solidify it into one little nugget instead of
Mm,
because I'm verbose, as you might have noticed, and I would go, well, then you could do this and you could do that and you could do this, and no, you have to skywrite it. It has to be very short, and that
that's an
is
excellent question.
thank you, I appreciate it. I when I first started asking it, people looked at me funny, but I didn't care. I think that is it's something that it really it distills everything that
Hmm.
you've been saying today into
Mm,
one sentence. Don't give up. You know,
mm,
you've had many times when you could have given up and you didn't, and here you are. So I
mm.
really appreciate that that was your that was the thought that you wanted to give. And is there any other last bit of advice or wisdom before we end this conversation that you'd like to put out there?
Whoa, no. I mean, thank you for this opportunity. I mean, it's a joy to be talking with you because you ask good questions. You've read Lark and like her, so that's certainly an encouragement. But I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. This has been John DeDakis dropping wisdom all over the place. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. My name, once again, is Isolde Trachtenberg, and you have been listening to the Creative Mindset Podcast, where we are exploring how we can all live and work better creatively through using that creative mindset. If you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review wherever you listen to the podcast, whether it's iTunes or Google Podcasts or Spotify. Leave a review. Let me know what you're thinking. Comment, please. The community we're building here is so important, especially at this time when we are all discovering the opportunity to be creative. Once again, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and until next time, I send you all of my love. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2020. Today's music was Kevin MacLeod's Ave Marimba, brought to you by Creative Commons License 3.0, and Summer Fashion by Alexander Shamaluev. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I send you all of my love.